Did you know that in history there was an invincible warrior, the greatest fighter who ever lived, who died because of his own heel? Many of you are probably wondering right now, wait, how is that even possible? How does the world's most powerful warrior, someone who could defeat entire armies single-handedly, end up being killed by his own foot? Well, let me tell you the story of Achilles. Picture ancient Greece, where gods mingled with mortals and legends were born on bloody battlefields. There lived a sea goddess named Thetis, who fell in love with a mortal king named Peleus. When their son was born, she named him Achilles. From the moment she held him in her arms, she was filled with both joy and terror. For Thetis had the gift of prophecy. She had seen her son's fate. Achilles would become the greatest warrior the world had ever known, but he would also die young in battle. So what would any loving mother do? She decided to cheat fate itself. Thetis carried her infant son to the banks of the river Styx, that mystical waterway flowing between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The waters of this sacred river held incredible magical properties. Anyone dipped in its flow would become invulnerable, their body transformed into something more divine than human. But here's where things get interesting. How do you dip a baby in a river? You have to hold on to something, right? Exactly. Thetis gripped little Achilles by his heel and slowly lowered him into the dark, swirling waters. The river's ancient magic seeped into every part of his tiny body that touched the surface. His skin, his muscles, his bones all became harder than the finest armor. But that small spot where her fingers held him remained untouched by the magical waters, forever vulnerable, forever human. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so he has one weak spot. Big deal. Lots of heroes have weaknesses. But what made Achilles special wasn't just his invulnerable body. It was what happened next. As Achilles grew up, he was trained by Chiron, the wisest centaur who ever lived. Imagine a creature that's half horse, half man, possessing knowledge, warfare, medicine, and wisdom that even the gods respected. Under Chiron's guidance, Achilles didn't just learn to fight. He became the embodiment of martial perfection. Picture their training sessions. Achilles practicing his spear work until he could hit a target the size of a coin from impossible distances. Learning to move across battlefields so fast that enemies would see only a blur before his weapon found their heart. Chiron taught him strategy, honor, courage, and skill. But could Chiron teach him the one thing that might have saved his life? Could anyone teach Achilles humility? That's the real question, isn't it? Because when the Trojan War erupted, Achilles faced a choice that would reveal his true character. The prophecy was crystal clear. If he stayed home in Greece, he would live a long, peaceful life. He'd marry, have children, grow old surrounded by grandchildren, and eventually die quietly in his bed. But he would be forgotten by history. However, if he sailed to Troy to fight,
he would achieve eternal glory and fame. But his life would be cut short in his youth. What would you choose? A long, safe, comfortable life, or a short, dangerous, but glorious one? Achilles looked at the path of safety and saw only emptiness. What good was a long life if it meant nothing? He chose glory, knowing full well the price, and sailed for Troy with the Greek fleet. And on those blood-soaked beaches, something extraordinary happened. Achilles became more and less than human at the same time.
His prowess in battle was so supernatural that enemy soldiers would flee at the mere sight of his distinctive armor approaching. He moved through combat like a force of nature, his spear never missing its mark, his shield deflecting every blow, his very presence capable of turning any battle in the Greeks' favor. But then came the moment that changed everything. Do you know what brought down the world's greatest warrior? It wasn't an enemy spear or sword. It was his own pride.
King Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces, made a demand that Achilles surrender his war prize, a young woman named Briseis. To us, this might seem like a minor political dispute, but to Achilles, this was the ultimate insult to his honor. So, what did the most powerful warrior in the world do? Did he use his strength to simply take what he wanted? Did he challenge Agamemnon to single combat?
No, he threw a tantrum, like a child whose toy had been taken away. Achilles withdrew from the fighting entirely and sulked in his tent while his fellow Greeks died on the battlefield. Can you imagine? The one person who could have ended the war quickly chose to abandon his comrades over wounded pride. The consequences were catastrophic. Without their champion, the Greeks began suffering defeat after defeat. But here's where the story gets heartbreaking. Achilles had a dear friend named Patroclus, perhaps the only person who truly understood him. Watching his countrymen die while his best friend pouted over injured pride became unbearable. Have you ever lost someone so important that it felt like the world had ended? That's what happened to Achilles, except his grief transformed into something far more dangerous, a rage so pure and terrible that it consumed everything human left inside him. Picture him arming for battle again, but this time he wasn't the somewhat petulant hero who had withdrawn over wounded pride. This was a creature of divine wrath, a force of pure destruction whose only purpose was vengeance. When Achilles finally faced Hector in single combat outside Troy's walls, everyone knew how it would end. But what happened after his victory showed how completely grief and fury had consumed him.
Not content with simply killing his enemy, Achilles tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around the city walls, denying the fallen hero proper burial rites. This wasn't the act of a noble warrior. This was the behavior of someone who had lost all connection to honor and humanity. And this is where his real weakness revealed itself. Do you see it? It wasn't his heel that made him vulnerable. It was his complete loss of control, his abandonment of wisdom in favor of raw emotion. When Paris, the Trojan prince, shot his arrow at Achilles, it found its mark not because Paris was particularly skilled, but because Achilles had become reckless in his grief and rage. The arrow, guided by Apollo, who had grown disgusted with Achilles' treatment of Hector's body, struck that one vulnerable spot on his heel.
But think about this. If Achilles had been fighting with his usual tactical brilliance instead of blind fury, would that arrow have ever reached him? A warrior who had never been touched in years of combat suddenly becomes vulnerable because his judgment was clouded by emotion. So, what was Achilles' real weakness? Was it truly that tiny spot on his heel? Or was it his pride that made him abandon his friends, his grief that made him cruel, and his rage that made him careless? The physical weakness was just a symbol. The real tragedy of Achilles was that all his supernatural strength, all his divine protection, all his legendary skill meant nothing when he couldn't control his own heart.
This story teaches us something profound about human nature, doesn't it? Our greatest strengths often spring from the same source as our worst weaknesses. Achilles' passion made him the greatest warrior who ever lived, but it also made him prone to pride, rage, and destructive decisions. But there's something beautiful hidden in this tragedy too. What drove Patroclus to his death? Love for his friend and his countrymen. What drove Achilles to his doom? Love for Patroclus and the need to honor his memory. In a world of gods and monsters, epic battles, and divine interventions, the most powerful force was the love between two friends. Isn't that remarkable? Even in his darkest moments, even when he had become something monstrous, Achilles was motivated by love. Twisted, destructive love, perhaps, but love nonetheless.
And maybe that's the real lesson of his famous heel. We're all vulnerable somewhere. We all have that one spot where life can hurt us. But our physical vulnerabilities are nothing compared to our emotional ones. The strongest armor in the world can't protect us from our own feelings, our own poor choices, our own human nature. The story of Achilles reminds us that being invulnerable in body means nothing if we remain vulnerable in spirit. All the magical protection in the world cannot save us from the weapons we turn on ourselves. So the next time someone mentions Achilles' heel, remember, this isn't really a story about a weak spot on someone's foot. It's about the much more dangerous weak spots we all carry inside us. Our pride, our anger, our inability to see past our own pain to the bigger picture. Because in the end, that's what makes us human, isn't it? Not our strengths, but our weaknesses. Not our victories, but how we handle our defeats. Not our armor, but the places where we choose to remain soft and vulnerable to the world. If this deeper look into what really brought down history's greatest warrior has made you think differently about strength, weakness, and what it means to be human, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to support explorations into the profound truths hidden in ancient tales. Share this video with someone who appreciates stories that make you think. And subscribe with notifications on so you never miss our journeys into the timeless wisdom buried in mythology. These old stories still have so much to teach us about ourselves, and we're just beginning to uncover their secrets.